New Testament. Can't miss that point. So, as the churches would love to do it once a day. In the Anglican and the Catholic sphere, when would churches like to do it if they're really wealthy? Well, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Morning prayer, you know. As a matter of fact, in the Catholic Church, remember how many times you have the 7 hours? You know, from the beginning to Matins to whatever to Matins, and you go round and round and round. And guess what? They would have loved to have had communion every service, but they couldn't afford to. And so even the priests, you know, had to cut back. But theologically, we love to follow that. Oh, you need to prepare yourself more. The early church said, you don't need to prepare yourself more, you need to do it, right? I think this is funny. But, you know, what we should recognize that in history, there is always reasons for something to happen. But generally the reasons are, you know, for example, our church. We'd love to keep our budget at a really high rate, right? But what causes us to then cut our budget? The reality of the money that we're given. And what allows us to increase our budget? The reality of the money that's given. And if the church that doesn't follow that reality becomes like the Crystal Palace, right? You guys been following the Crystal Palace? They went bankrupt, they don't have a church anymore. See? The Catholic Church bought it, which is really cool. They get a Crystal Palace. I like this. That's the way you do it in good capitalism, though, right? I think it's positive. In any case, I guess I'm going to have to do the, well, let's see. Let's do the services. Let's do this about the services. They have the 3 major festivals. So you have Pesach, you have Shavuot, and Sukkot. So these are the major 3 festivals. These are also the festivals, the traveling festivals, the one when you had to go to Jerusalem. So Pesach is Passover, right? Shavuot is the bringing of the loaves, and Sukkot is the festival of booths. We've talked about the festival of booths. It's very important. Sukkot is probably one of the most important festivals. We talk about the high holy days, but of the beginning of the year. But those are the 3 major festivals. And during the 3 major festivals, these are the three of the 6 mentioned in the Torah. During those festivals, the 6 psalms of the Hallel are always done. They're always done. All of them. In order. To the end. This is significant because remember in Sukkot, the Festival of Booths, that's when they expected the Messiah to announce himself, and that's when Jesus, according to John, announced himself during the Hallel. During the minor festivals are the ones that are not mentioned, and I'm going to mention the other major festivals. There's 3 others. But during the minor festivals, the festivals which are not mentioned in the Torah, specifically, they still offer the Hallel. They also offer the Hallel at Rosh Chodesh, that is the lunar month, the beginning of the lunar month. Now, there are specific ones where it's not said. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, if you've got your list, you can mark these. The Hallel is not said at all. And the reason is because, if you remember Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this is a quote from the Talmud. The Talmud in the Masrech Achen 10b says, "Is it seemly for the king," that is implying God, "to be sitting on his throne of judgment with the books of life and death open before him, and for the people to sing joyful praises to him?" And that's the reason why on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur the Hallel is not said. Because the Hallel is meant to be joyous. Joyous. Okay? Now the big deal with that is, remember, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, what's the big deal about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the books of life and death? Those are the days of atonement is Yom Kippur, or did I say right? I think Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year. So the big deal is that during the time when they're being judged for the year in Jewish thought, I would think you want to be really joyous in that point. But okay, that's all right. But Talmudic expression So what does this imply about the use of the Hallel? You had to have the Talmud first before you have the setting of when you're going to do it, right? So either the Hallel was done in every festival until the ruling by the Talmud. What's the point of the Talmud? What's the importance of the Talmud here? This is really important stuff, because this is stuff that, you know, if you're going to teach kids anything, this is what I think we ought to be teaching them, my personal opinion. Because remember, you got the Mishnah. What's the Mishnah? You got the Torah. What's the Torah?
Law.
Torah is the law. The first 5 books of Moses. It's a written law. What's the Mishnah?
Oral.
The oral Torah. That's the thing handed down. What's the Talmud? Talmud.
The priest's interpretation of the Mishnah.
It is the rabbinical interpretation of the Mishnah. Why is that important? What's important?
Is it like the commentary?
Okay. What is the immutable law that can never change? Torah. Torah is immutable, cannot change. The Mishnah, can it change?
Well, it's oral. It's not supposed to.
It's not. The Mishnah cannot change. But what can I interpret? The Jewish rabbis said, can I interpret the Torah? No. They said you can't interpret the Torah. But what can I interpret? The Mishnah. And so the Talmud is an expression in law. This is law. This is, by the way, the basis of all our cultural law. Okay? Comes out of the Jewish expression, mostly the Torah, because it was immutable. Isn't that interesting? We were supposed to have an immutable constitution, very hard to change. Sharia law is, you know, the Muslim Sharia law. Sharia law is similar in the concept, in the idea, the concept of this. I'm not familiar with it exactly, but where do legal things come from? And in Jewish thought, as a matter of fact, right now, what's the big fight in Jerusalem? You guys keep track of this? Big fight in Jerusalem? The Orthodox conservative versus the liberal Jewish view, because the Orthodox conservative want to do what?
Almost like the sheriff.
Well, I wouldn't compare this similar, because they really do. If you've ever read the Talmud, and I probably should bring a copy of at least one of the books so you can see it. It's really interesting. But this Talmud is all right. Max is a lawyer. I know he's a lawyer. Max, what do you have all over your walls in your office?
I don't have an office.
Oh, man!
He's online.
He used to have walls full of...
Well, law books and plaques and credentials.
Well, he used to have Blackwell. Do you have Blackwell?
The
All
dictionary.
the case precedents,
Like an
right?
encyclopedia plus all the updates.
What he had the interpretation of law, either the laws that were written down or the interpretation by the courts of the law. That's exactly what the Talmud is. The Talmud is the court interpretation of the Mishnah and, by the way, of the Torah law. Even though the Torah couldn't change, by the way, what was the first thing that the rabbis changed? Anybody want to guess? The first thing changed in the Talmud from the Torah. They weren't supposed to do it, but they did anyway. Jubilee. What happened at Jubilee? All the property returned to the property owners at Jubilee. And the first thing that the Talmudic rabbis did is said, you don't have to give it back. And they made a whole bunch of legal rulings and arguments of why you didn't have to give it back. Okay? Other legal rulings. For example, it says on the Torah you can't walk further than X. Basically, a courtyard is how they defined it in the Talmud. Eventually, they said, an area that could be ringed by a rope. So what did they do to the city of Jerusalem?
Longer ropes.
They put a rope around Jerusalem every Friday and made sure it was roped. And that way you could walk where?
Anywhere.
Anywhere in the city of Jerusalem. Also, it says you can't travel further on Shabbat than there's a certain amount of journey. But it's not a day's journey, but it's a certain amount of, I think it's, anyway, a mealtime journey or whatever. So what would happen is, and by the way, who's supposed to follow the Torah law in Jerusalem? Everybody's supposed to follow. Yeah.
Who makes the decisions? Who's the court that makes those interpretations?
The rabbis at the time, this is good stuff. This is really good stuff because it's important. You know, in our era, we have judges that are voted or, you know, elected or somehow appointed. Okay? In the rabbinical era, the way you became a rabbi is through, it's basically a guild process. Easily, you know, it's a guild process. And I mentioned it before, it's very important to note this. Because remember, how did Jesus get his disciples? He called them. Who does that? Who called their disciples in the ancient world? No way. The Greeks did. Jesus was not doing anything that was Jewish in there. That's a total Greek thing. Okay? How did a rabbi get a disciple?
Assigned.
The disciple came to him. Okay? So you're the kid. When did Jewish teaching start for the boys? No. When did it start for the girls? Never. Okay, when did it start for the boys? No, the boys started when they were 5. Because by 12 they had to do what? They had to have the Torah memorized. In Jesus' time, the Torah was supposed to be memorized. Why do you have to have it memorized?
So that you can always.
Well, so you could read it.
So you can read it out in the synagogue.
Vowels you have
You
to
have
be
to
able
know what
to read
it
it.
says.
So you could read it, because in the ancient world, all writing is mnemonics. We got to get this clear in our minds, because if we don't have this clear, we don't understand the ancient world. In the ancient world, all writing is mnemonics. So if you're going to read mnemonics, what do you have to do? You have to know what it says. So, you know, I say memorization. What they did is they sat with the book in front of them, and the rabbi will say to them what it says, and they memorize it. You have to memorize it. And then the mnemonic of the book allows you to do what? Remember and recall it properly. That's the way reading. There's no reading in the ancient world. It's all mnemonics. So by the time you're 12 and your bar mitzvah, that's what a bar mitzvah is about. Theoretically, now in the modern world, what did they do?
Party.
Well, just before your bar mitzvah, they tell you what scripture is going to be read, because it's in the cycle, just like our cycles, by the way. And where did our cycle come from? Based in the Jewish. Our Old Testament reading is based in the Jewish readings. Okay? So that's where our cycle started for our readings. But in the Old Testament, they read the whole of the Old Testament through the year. Okay? And the cycle of readings is that, you know, they would know it. Now, in your current bar mitzvah, what they do is they tell you what the reading is, and you go memorize what?
One verse.
That one part you're supposed to recite. And then you have the helpers beside you. They're going to beat you in the head if you don't do it right. You know? Not quite, but they help you. They make sure that you get the intonation right and everything else correct. Pronunciation's right. So, but in the ancient world, they were never sure exactly what was going to be given to them, or maybe they were, I don't know. But the big deal is they were supposed to memorize the whole thing, so that then anything that they opened before them, just like, remember, Jesus went to the synagogue, and what did he do? And what was really important is, what were they reading? No, what were they reading in general? What language were they reading in the synagogue?
Greek. Hebrew.
They were reading Hebrew. What were they speaking? What did the kids learn to speak at home?
Aramaic.
Aramaic and Greek. Okay? So do you see this? Very interesting. Hebrew was already a dead language at this time. It was like Latin. It was only used in the service.
And wasn't he like 8 years old when he did that? That's why they were all shocked and awed.
They were, how old was he? Was he 12 or 8?
12.
12. I think he was 12. When he went, the reason they were in shock and awe was because okay, all right.
But
All right.
They gave a Talmud on
I
it.
got to finish this. I got to finish this part. All right. So I'm a rabbi, okay? And how do I get you as my rabbinical student? You learn the Torah and you learn it so well that by the time you're 12, you got it perfectly memorized, right? And then you do what? You get a recommendation either from your rabbi or your rabbi, the guy who taught you, memorized this, basically says to you, okay, you could be a rabbi. What you got to do is you got to attach yourself to a rabbi, and he advises you that you should go for what kind of rabbi? If you're really good, where's he going to send you?
Pharisee.
Jerusalem.
Well, to Jerusalem too. And who, at this era, in the era of Jesus Christ, who was the greatest rabbi?
Nicodemus.
Gamaliel. Gamaliel was the guy. He's a rabbi of rabbis, called the Rabboni. Ooh, where have you heard that before? Remember they called Jesus Rabboni? Rabbi of rabbis. They called him, Gamaliel was called the rabbi of rabbis. And so, Paul, for example, was obviously advised by his rabbi, the guy who taught him, to go to Gamaliel. And what you did as a student is you'd go to the rabbi and you would seek an audience. And the rabbi, this is a small closed community, so if the rabbi had heard about you, he might let you in. And if he offers for you to do what in front of him?
Recite the Torah.
To sit. To sit. Anytime anybody sits in the ancient world, it means they are,
Submitting.
well, they're going to teach or learn. Because what do you do to eat, guys? You recline to eat. In the ancient world, you sit to learn or discuss or talk. Very important to note these things, because when the writers wrote these things, they didn't throw in words just to throw them in. Like in English, we throw it, in English, we sit down to a meal, we sit down to talk, we sit down to smoke, we sit down to this, we sit down to that, right? But in the ancient world, there's specific, because did they have chairs?
They had steps.
No chairs. Well, maybe it had steps. We're going to find steps in a village,
Synagogue.
right? Well, the floors were dirt. Dirt floor synagogue. How you gonna, well, and we saw the picture. The pastor had up the synagogue in Caesarea. I don't know if they had any steps or not.
It's a second,
Or in,
it's a
Capernaum.
2nd century synagogue, by the way.
So the thing is, probably not. Dirt floors, you're not going to have any steps anyway. But people sat. And when you sit, by the way, what's the problem with sitting in the ancient world? You're going to get dirty. You're going to get dirty. So, we don't reflect on this. Do we sit down and assume we're going to get dirty? No. So it's very important, because if someone sits in the ancient world, it implies something very specific. And, okay, so the rabbi invites you to come sit in his house. And probably, can you imagine this? The rabbi has students around him, and if he offers you a cushion, or if you're brand new, he probably offers you the floor, the dirt, the cold. If he's working in something with stone floor, probably offer you a stone, right? A stone floor. The rabbi's probably sitting on a nice cushion. But in any case, what the rabbi then did is the rabbi, you're kind of on your own. You're on your own, because the rabbi is going to be doing what? Well, how does a rabbi teach? No, ma'am. The way a rabbi teaches is he recites the Tanakh. 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 I don't know if I spelled it right. Anyway, I can't spell Hebrew. The Torah, you already did. You got that memorized, right? You wouldn't be there if you didn't have it fully memorized. He ain't going to talk the Torah at you at all. He's going to talk the Tanakh, the other books. So the Psalms, the minors, all those other ones, right? So he'll give you those. And then he's going to give you what?
The interpretation.
The Mishnah. Remember, this time, in the time of Christ, it wasn't written down. It was written down about 100 AD. So it's not written down. So when is he going to give you the Mishnah?
After you have the Tanakh memorized?
Yeah, you got to have all this memorized. And by the way, we think Old Testament, but they also were doing the Apocrypha, LXX. So you got all those. What is 63 plus, well, you take out 5, so you got those, and then you add another 20. So you got, what, almost 80-something books, 70-something books that you got to memorize? Before the rabbi begins to recite the Mishnah to you, and see, the whole time, he's got a mixed group. He's got the newbies and he's got the oldies, and they're all together in the same room.
K through 12.
So half the time you may be like totally clueless. And then part of the time you may be, oh, that's Ruth. Run over, grab the scroll of Ruth, and maybe there's 5 guys hanging, right, around the scroll of Ruth. The other guys got it memorized. So there are 5 guys, okay, hogging the scroll of Ruth, trying to follow the rabbi. You see this? And then the rabbi goes, he decides, well, I'm going to do Mishnah today. So he's starting a Mishnah. And then what does he go into after that? Now, you notice this isn't, see, I pictured this to you as a serial process, but it's not serial, it's all parallel. It's all happening at once. So what does he go into next after the Mishnah? The Talmudic rulings. The Talmudic rulings. And then at some point, if you have become a rabbi, if you have spent this 10, 12, 30, 15 years, maybe even married the rabbi's daughter by this time, maybe, if you were special enough, okay? At some point, the rabbi is talking a Talmudic thing, and what do you finally do after you've been silent and not said a word?
You could challenge it on a subject.
You don't ask a question, what do you do? Well, I wouldn't say teach. You make an assertion. Yes, you make an amar. Remember, we have amar and dabar. Amar is a command word. God amar, right? And then we also have dabar. Dabar can be a question. Dabar is not a statement of assertion. But you make an amar. And your amar is, okay, let's say, Rabbi, I don't think a rope should define a courtyard in terms of Jerusalem. Ah! And the rabbi, and then you say, based in Exodus, well, you wouldn't say it, but based in Exodus, and you quote like a whole long thing, string, and based in, the Ruth and the interpretation of the Talmudic, for la 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 la, 10 that's not written down this time, right? It's not written. And the rabbi looks at you and goes, "You're an idiot." He maybe do that, He may say, "That's dumb," right? Go back and rethink. Because that's the way rabbis work. Rabbinic teaching is not what we think of as teaching.
So that was Jesus' statements to all these Pharisees. Was these assertions?
He was not only making assertions, but what kind of teaching was Jesus doing throughout his entire thing?
He taught rationally.
He taught with his
I like that very much. Rationally, I agree with that 100%. But what style of teaching is it?
Rabbinic?
No, it's Socrates. It's like Socrates.
It's Socratic. That's, okay, if you notice, okay, not all teachers teach the way I teach. I use Socratic teaching methods because I'll ask you a question. And I expect you to give me a rational answer back, right? This is Socratic teaching. This is also Greek teaching. This is the kind of teaching that Jesus Christ did. If I were doing rabbinic teaching, I would stand here and not say anything to you. And you would then promote an idea or a concept or an idea to me and defend it. And then I would respond. How do you think I would respond if I were really a rabbi?
I guess it depends on your motive.
I wouldn't ask you a question. That's Greek. I would say, why don't you go brush up on Exodus? Why don't you go check Talmud 11h? Why don't you go check the Mishnah? See? Totally different than our way of thinking. So, in this, if you know. So when Jesus taught, what did they say about him? Not like
Not
the
like
rabbis.
scribes.
Not like the rabbis. Yes, sir.
This may be kind of a segue, but how did the rabbis support themselves? Did the students pay for this training?
That's a great question. Now, the rabbis, could be both. Most of the rabbis were Pharisees. But also, you also had rabbis that could have been Sadducees, although less likely, because Sadducees were priests. So the priests were supported how? By the temple sacrifices. The rabbis, how were they supported? Generally, they were supported by the synagogue, because they were the trainers of the kids. So they actually had developed at this point, the synagogue, they didn't pay a tithe, because the tithe went to the temple, and the tithe was supposed to be eaten by the people. But they would actually pay money to support their synagogue. And so the rabbis gained their pay by the people's direct support of the synagogue. And we're not sure how they did it. Today, how do they support the synagogue? Yeah, basically the same way we support the church. You pass the offering plate, or people make commitments to it, right?
Well, didn't Paul have he had a tent making skill, so did they also have jobs that they did?
Now, that is a beautiful question, because, that has been an argument or a discussion forever. Did Paul pick up his skill later? Did he get it from his father and pick up later? Or did he was that his occupation also as a rabbi? See? And that's always been a disputeful question. All I can tell you, and we'll finish on this, we'll get to 115 next week and on. But I think it's really important, because this has been some really good discussion about ancient period things fitting within the Hillel. But today, what do rabbis try to do? How do rabbis generally get their pay today? Well, through grants. Grants, institutional grants, personal grants, individual grants. Many times the rabbi that is supporting you, you go under a rabbi, and not only is that rabbi providing you learning, he is also providing you food. And that's one of the way they did in the ancient world. So how did they get their money? Well, from grants, maybe they're a university professor, other ways. For example, in Orthodoxy in Jerusalem, you'll find a lot of rabbis that are supported through the community, the Orthodox community, and then they have their rabbi trainees. So it's a really big deal. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray that you continue to look after us this week. We pray these things in your Son's blessed and holy name. Amen.